in the velvet hush of the forbidden city, where moonlight tiptoes across silk screens, and even the shadows wear perfume, the empresses do not sleep. They whisper. They whisper of jade lovers and scandalous slippers, of concubines who snored in calligraphy and fans that fluttered with forbidden meaning. They whisper of midnight treaties signed with yawns, of royal banquets so boring they became legendary lullabies. And if you listen closely, very closely, you might hear the soft rustle of a robe, the giggle of a ghostly handmaiden, or the seductive sigh of an empress who once ruled with nothing but a wink and a well-placed hairpin. This is not a story of war or glory. It is a story of naps, nonsense, and the kind of gossip that puts dynasties to sleep. So lie back, loosen your robe, and let the whispers begin. And hey, before you drift off into a 1,000-year nap, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which dynasty you're watching from. Tang, Ming, Qing, or just the kingdom of Couch in the deepest hour of night, when the moon hung low like a lazy dumpling and the stars blinked like bored courtiers, the forbidden city exhaled. The silk curtains swayed with secrets. The koi in the imperial pond stopped gossiping, and somewhere in the empress's chamber, a yawn escaped. Soft, slow, and scandalously seductive, Empress Dowager Yuanji, famed for her ability to bore entire armies into submission, reclined on her cloud-stitched pillow. Her robe, embroidered with 108 sleepy cranes, shimmered faintly in the candlelight. She turned to her handmaidens and whispered, "Tonight, we shall discuss the ceremonial evolution of imperial slippers." The handmaidens, trained in the ancient art of pretending to be fascinated while mentally composing dumpling recipes, leaned in. One of them blinked twice, which in palace code meant, "I'm already asleep with my eyes open." "Slippers," Yuanqi began, her voice like warm tea poured over velvet, were not merely footwear. They were declarations. A slipper, embroidered with cranes, meant peace. One with dragons meant indigestion. One with clouds meant you were probably late for your own coronation. Outside, the bamboo rustled like a bored historian flipping scrolls. The palace cats, each named after a dynasty, curled up in their embroidered baskets. Tang purred. Song snored. Ming muttered something about taxation and fell asleep. The emperor, who had wandered in hoping for romance, found himself trapped in a lecture about slipper thread count. He tried to escape, but the empress's voice was hypnotic. "Let me tell you about Empress Wu's midnight decree on robe embroidery." He collapsed into a nearby chaise lounge, defeated by boredom and aroused by the way she said brocade. And so began the whispers. The empresses of the Forbidden City, each a master of elegance and passive-aggressive embroidery, had reached a breaking point. Empress Dowager Yuanxi, who preferred her pillows soft enough to disappear into, accused Empress Mei Ling of sabotaging her naps with firm stuffing. Mei Ling, in turn, claimed Yuanxi's pillows were so fluffy they caused altitude sickness. Meanwhile, Empress Zhen Zhen, who had once seduced a visiting diplomat with nothing but a wink and a goose-feather pillow, insisted that only poetry-fed geese produced acceptable fluff. The emperor, who had hoped for a quiet evening of dumpling tasting and robe folding, found himself in the middle of a fluff war. He summoned the Grand Council of Sleep, which included the Royal Napmaster General, who hadn't been awake since the Tang Dynasty, the Imperial Yawn Translator, who could interpret sighs into policy, and a goose named Bow Bow, who had recently been knighted for exceptional molting. They convened in the Hall of Eternal Snooze, a chamber so boring it had its own echo of indifference. For 3 days, the Empresses debated. Should pillows be fluffed clockwise or counterclockwise? Was lavender stuffing too seductive? Could a pillow be considered treasonous if it caused neck pain? There were dramatic moments. Empress Mei Ling fainted onto a pillow stuffed with rice and declared it a betrayal of softness. Empress Zhen Zhen composed a haiku about betrayal and fluff. Yuan Shi simply yawned so deeply that 2 handmaidens fell asleep mid-curtsy. Finally, a compromise was reached. The pillow treaty was signed, on silk, with ink made from crushed jasmine petals, and the size of retired concubines. It included the following clauses. Clause 1. All pillows shall be fluffed thrice daily by handmaidens wearing gloves scented with moonlight. Clause 2. No pillow shall exceed the height of a sleeping cat. Clause 3. Empress. Zhen Zhen may continue her poetry goose practice, but only on Thursdays and never during dumpling hour. The Emperor, exhausted, drooled on the treaty. His saliva was deemed a royal seal. That night, the Empresses gathered in the moonlight chamber, sipping chrysanthemum tea and whispering about the treaty's implications. Was it peace? Was it fluff? Or was it just another excuse to wear their scandalously sheer night robes and giggle about the Emperor's snore that sounded suspiciously like help? Outside, the wind carried their whispers across the rooftops, where even the stars leaned in to listen. A sleepy scribe recorded it all, yawning between every line, and accidentally titled the scroll The Treaty of Pillowtopia. And thus, peace was restored, soft, seductive, and slightly scented with goose. Long before the Pillow Treaty, before the great fan flap of 1292, there was Empress Wu, she of the whispering robes and scandalous silks. They said her robes could speak, not in words, of course. That would be ridiculous, but in rustles, in sighs, in the subtle language of a silk, brushing against skin. When Empress Wu entered a chamber, her robes arrived first, fluttering like gossip, shimmering like secrets, and trailing a scent of plum wine and forbidden ambition. She had 108 robes, each for a different mood. The robe of mild disapproval, worn during budget meetings. The robe of suggestive agreement, worn during treaty negotiations. And the robe of unapologetic seduction, worn when she wanted something or someone. One robe, the infamous Whispering Orchid, was banned from diplomatic events after it caused a visiting prince to propose marriage, abdicate his throne, and take up poetry. All in one afternoon, the emperor, who had once tried to ban her from wearing anything with tassels, eventually gave up and declared, let her rule. Empress Wu's chambers were lined with mirrors, not for vanity, but for strategy. She studied her reflection like a general studies maps. A tilt of the shoulder here, a flash of ankle there. Her robes were her army, and she never lost a battle. One night, during the Festival of Lanterns, she wore a robe so sheer it was mistaken for moonlight. Courtiers gasped. Handmaidens fainted. The emperor spilled his tea and whispered, I surrender. But beneath the silk and seduction, Empress Wu was a scholar. She wrote treatises on nap etiquette, invented the imperial wink, and once translated a scroll using only sighs. Her robes whispered, yes, but her mind roared, and when she finally retired, She left behind a legacy of elegance, intrigue, and a closet so powerful it was declared a national treasure. To this day, if you wander the Forbidden City at midnight and listen closely, you might hear the faint rustle of silk and the soft, seductive whisper of a robe that once ruled an empire. It was a quiet night in the Forbidden City, so quiet, in fact, that even the koi in the imperial pond had stopped gossiping. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the lacquered rooftops, and the wind tiptoed through bamboo groves like a handmaiden sneaking snacks. In the Empress's private tea chamber, a single jade teacup sat on a lacquered tray. It was no ordinary cup. It had witnessed secrets, seductions, and one particularly scandalous dumpling incident involving a diplomat from the West who mistook ginger for passion. The cup belonged to Empress Zhen, she of the poetry-fed geese and scandalously sheer night robes. Her tea rituals were legendary, not for their precision, but for their drama. She brewed with flair, poured with flirtation, and sipped like she was tasting forbidden knowledge. Tonight, however, the cup trembled, not from earthquakes, not from ghosts, but from anticipation. Empress Zhen had invited the emperor for midnight tea, not a formal affair. No scrolls, no scribes, no ceremonial yawns, just two people, one cup, and a tray of mooncakes shaped like sleeping cats. She wore her robe of subtle suggestion, which was mostly suggestion and very little robe. Her hair was pinned with a single jade comb, rumored to have belonged to a concubine who once seduced an entire chess tournament. The emperor arrived late, flustered, and slightly overdressed. He bowed, she giggled, and the teacup trembled again. "Shall we sip?" she whispered. Her voice like plum wine poured over secrets. They sat. They sipped. They sighed. The tea was chrysanthemum, laced with hints of honey and scandal. The emperor complimented the flavor. Zhen complimented his collarbone. Outside, the wind paused to listen. Inside, the jade teacup, having survived centuries of imperial boredom, finally felt alive. They spoke of dreams, of dumplings, of the time Empress Wu's robe caused a diplomatic incident. They laughed. They leaned. They almost kissed. But the emperor sneezed, and the moment passed like a cloud over moonlight. Still, the teacup trembled, and when the emperor left, flustered and flushed, Zhen whispered to the cup, "You held it all, didn't you?" The cup said nothing, but it glowed. To this day, the jade teacup remains in the Forbidden City, sealed behind glass, labeled simply, "Do not sip after midnight." Every dynasty has its defining moment. The Tang dynasty had poetry. The Song dynasty had porcelain. The Ming dynasty had walls. But the Whispering dynasty, unofficial, unrecorded, and entirely invented by bored scribes, had the Nap Olympics. Held once every 7 years in the Velvet Pavilion, the Nap Olympics were a sacred tradition. Concubines, handmaidens, and occasionally rogue eunuchs competed in the ancient arts of lounging, sighing, and falling asleep in the most seductive pose possible. The rules were simple. No snoring louder than a flute, no drooling unless it formed a poetic shape, and absolutely no waking up before the final gong. Empress Dowager Yuan Shi was the reigning champion. Her signature move, the sideways sigh with one bare shoulder, had caused 3 judges to faint and 1 to propose marriage to a pillow. This year, however, competition was fierce. Empress Zhen arrived in a robe so sheer it was mistaken for mist. She performed the reverse recline of regret, a pose so emotionally complex it required 2 translators and a goose. Empress Mei Ling, ever the strategist, wore silk lingerie embroidered with sleepy dragons. Her move, the lazy lotus curl, was so hypnotic that the emperor walked into a wall and apologized to a vase. The judges, 3 retired concubines, and 1 confused monk, took their roles seriously. They scored based on a pillow placement, robe ripple, emotional depth of the sigh, and whether the nap felt like a metaphor for lost love. There were scandals, of course. 1 concubine was disqualified for using a heated blanket. Another bribed a judge with mooncakes shaped like thighs. But in the end, Empress Yuan Shi reclaimed her title with a daring move. The triple yawn with accidental leg reveal. The crowd gasped. The emperor wept. A cat named Qing fainted. The gold medal, a brooch shaped like a sleeping phoenix, was pinned to her robe. She accepted it with a wink and immediately fell asleep standing up. The Nap Olympics ended with a slow clap, a group nap, and a scroll titled, The Art of Seductive Slumber. To this day, the Velvet Pavilion remains silent, sacred, and slightly scented with lavender. And if you listen closely at midnight, you might hear the soft sigh of a concubine still perfecting her pose. In the grand tradition of imperial boredom, few events rivaled the annual chrysanthemum banquet, a gathering so long, so lavish, and so mind-numbingly ceremonial that even the dumplings looked tired. Empress Mei Ling was this year's host, and she had a reputation to uphold. Her banquets were legendary, not for the food, but for the subtle warfare waged between glances, fans, and strategically timed yawns. The guest list included the emperor, who had promised to stay awake this time, Empress Zhen Zhen, who brought a fan embroidered with scandal, Empress Dowager Yuan Shi, who arrived with a pillow and a scroll titled, How to Pretend You're Listening. The banquet hall shimmered with gold, silk, and the faint scent of passive aggression. Musicians played a tune so slow, it was technically a lullaby. The dumplings were shaped like imperial regrets. The soup was served in bowls that whispered, You could be napping. Empress Mei Ling wore her robe of dangerous eyes, a crimson silk masterpiece that revealed just enough shoulder to cause diplomatic confusion. Her gaze was sharp, her smile was slow, and her chopsticks moved like poetry. She began the evening with a toast to peace, prosperity, and the art of pretending to enjoy boiled lotus root. The emperor chuckled nervously. Zhen Zhen winked. Yuan Shi yawned. As the courses dragged on, each more blandly exquisite than the last, the empresses began their true sport, banquet flirting. Zhen Zhen dropped her fan, twice, once on purpose. Mei Ling sipped her tea with such precision that 3 ministers questioned their marriages. Yuan Shi fell asleep mid-toast and still managed to look seductive. The emperor, overwhelmed by glances and ginger, tried to escape through a side door, but was intercepted by a goose named Bao Bao, who had been trained in etiquette and espionage. Dessert arrived, mooncakes filled with mystery and mild regret. Mei Ling leaned in and whispered to the emperor, Careful, mine has a secret. He bit into his. It was just red bean. But the way she said it made him question everything. By the end of the night, treaties had been hinted at, alliances had shifted, and one eunuch had written a poem about dumpling betrayal. The banquet was declared a success. No one remembered the food. Everyone remembered the eyes, and as the guests departed, the wind carried whispers through the silk-draped corridors. She looked at him like a dynasty waiting to happen, deep within the archives of the Forbidden City, past the shelves of ceremonial yawns, and beneath the dust of forgotten dumpling recipes lay a scroll so ancient, so boring, and so mysteriously seductive that it was sealed behind a curtain of sighs. It was called the Scroll of 10,000 Snores. Legend claimed it was written by a scribe named Lin Lin, who had once fallen asleep while transcribing a treaty and accidentally invented a new dialect made entirely of snores. The scroll was said to contain the history of imperial nap positions, a ranking of the most boring banquets, and a forbidden passage so sultry it once caused a goose to blush. Empress Dowager Yuan Shi, ever the connoisseur of sleep literature, requested the scroll for her evening reading. It arrived wrapped in silk and sealed with a yawn so powerful it made the delivery eunuch forget his name. She reclined on her cloud-stitched chaise, summoned her handmaidens, and began to read aloud. The first section was harmless. In the year of the sleepy ox, the emperor declared Tuesdays nap-worthy. The second section was mildly scandalous. Empress Mei Ling once seduced a diplomat by blinking slowly during a treaty. But then came the forbidden passage. It began with a moan, not a loud one, not vulgar, just suggestive, like a silk ribbon slipping off a shoulder. The scroll trembled. The candles flickered. One handmaiden fainted into a bowl of plum wine. The passage described a midnight encounter between Empress Zhen Zhen and a visiting prince who mistook her robe for moonlight and her sigh for consent. It was written in metaphor, wrapped in poetry, and punctuated with ellipses that implied everything and confirmed nothing. Yuan Shi paused. This is dangerously drowsy. She read on. The prince had offered her a dumpling. She had accepted. They had shared tea. And then, according to the scroll, they had engaged in a ritual known only as the Whispering Lotus, which involved fans, feathers, and a strategically placed scroll. The emperor, who had wandered in hoping for a bedtime story, heard the moan and panicked. Is this diplomacy? Yuan Shi smiled. It's history. The scroll was resealed, rewrapped, and placed back in the archives, this time behind a curtain of double size and a warning label. Do not read aloud unless wearing silk. To this day, the scroll remains untouched. But sometimes, late at night, the wind rustles through the archives and carries a whisper, a moan, and the faint sound of a goose giggling in the hush of the imperial moonlight, where secrets curled like incense and even the shadows wore silk. A single yawn echoed through the jade corridor, and history changed forever. It wasn't just any yawn. It was forbidden. Empress Mei Ling had sworn an oath never to yawn in the presence of the emperor during ceremonial hours. It was a vow made in silk, sealed with plum wine, and witnessed by 3 concubines and a goose named Bao Bao. But vows, like robes, are sometimes too tight. The emperor had been delivering his annual speech on rice taxation, a topic so dry it made dumplings weep. Mei Ling, dressed in her robe of dutiful listening, which was mostly shoulder and very little sleeve, tried her best. She nodded. She sipped tea. She blinked slowly, hoping to simulate interest. But then, it happened. A yawn. Soft. Seductive. Slightly scented with jasmine. It slipped past her lips, like a sigh wrapped in velvet. The emperor paused mid-sentence. The ministers gasped. One eunuch dropped his scroll. Bao Bao honked in horror, The yawn echoed through the chamber, bouncing off jade pillars and landing squarely in the Emperor's ego. You yawned, he whispered, clutching his ceremonial dumpling. Mei Ling smiled. I did. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't rebellion. It was exhaustion. Beautiful, unapologetic exhaustion. The kind that comes from years of pretending to care about rice. The Emperor, torn between outrage and arousal, declared the vow broken. The scroll was burned. The goose was released. And Mei Ling was summoned to the moonlight chamber for a private reprimand. She arrived in her robe of unrepentant grace, carrying a pillow and a fan embroidered with the phrase, oops. The reprimand lasted 3 hours. It involved tea, tension, and a moment where the Emperor accidentally complimented her yawn technique. By dawn, the vow was rewritten. Yawns were permitted during speeches longer than 12 minutes. Empress Mei Ling was to teach elegant yawning to junior concubines. Bao Bao was promoted to Minister of Mood. The forbidden yawn became legend. Poets wrote verses about it. Artists painted it. One scroll depicted it as a phoenix emerging from a silk cloud. And somewhere, deep in the archives, a sleepy scribe added a footnote. Sometimes a yawn is just a yawn, and sometimes it's a revolution. In the twilight hush of the Forbidden City, where secrets were stored in silk sleeves, and gossip floated like incense smoke, there lived an empress with a peculiar obsession. She counted hairpins, not just hers, everyone's. Empress Zhen, famed for her poetry-fed geese and scandalous tea rituals, believed that a woman's soul could be measured in jade, gold, and the occasional pearl-tipped pin. Her collection was legendary. Over 3,000 hairpins, each catalogued by mood, memory, and mischief. There was the hairpin of mild regret, worn during awkward banquets. The hairpin of dangerous curiosity, worn when eavesdropping behind silk screens. And the hairpin of forbidden delight, worn only once, and never spoken of again. But Zhen didn't just count hairpins. She counted lovers. Not aloud, of course. That would be vulgar. She counted in glances, in sighs, in the way her robe slipped off one shoulder during a toast. Her ledger was a scroll hidden inside a hollow comb, written in invisible ink made from plum wine and flirtation. The Emperor was listed as Entry Megre 7, surprisingly flexible. A visiting prince was Entry Narration 12. Mistook my fan for a signal. It was. A poet was Entry 19. Wrote me a verse so boring I kissed him to make him stop. Her favorite lover, however, was never numbered. He was a mystery, a shadow who appeared only during the Festival of Lanterns, wearing a mask shaped like a sleeping phoenix and whispering riddles in her ear. She called him the hairpin thief. Each year, he stole one pin from her collection. Each year she let him. And each year, she added a new entry to her secret scroll. He took jade, I gave gold. The handmaidens speculated. The concubines gossiped. The emperor sulked. But Zhen simply smiled and counted. One night, she wore all her hairpins at once, an act so bold it caused a diplomatic incident and a minor neck injury. She declared, "Tonight, I am every version of myself." And when she removed them, one by one, she whispered a name with each pin, some real, some imagined, some unforgettable. To this day, her comb remains sealed in the archives, humming softly with secrets, and if you listen closely, you might hear the faint clink of jade against gold, and the sigh of an empress who knew exactly how to count what mattered. It was the eve of the Festival of Lanterns, and the forbidden city shimmered like a dream dipped in honey. Silk banners danced in the breeze, dumplings steamed in every corner, and the air was thick with the scent of plum wine and possibility. Empress Zhenzhen stood on her balcony, wrapped in her robe of flickering intent, a sheer, golden garment that caught the light like a secret. Her hair was pinned with a lantern-shaped comb, and her fan bore the phrase, "I might say yes." Below, the courtiers released their lanterns into the night sky, each one carrying a wish, a regret, or a scandal disguised as poetry. But Zhenzhen had only one lantern, small, crimson, and enchanted. It blinked. Not a flicker, not a flutter, a blink. The handmaidens gasped. One fainted into a bowl of sesame noodles. The emperor, watching from his tower, dropped his scroll and whispered, "She's doing it again." Legend said that the blinking lantern was a signal, a call to a lover long gone, or perhaps never truly gone. It had blinked once before, during the year of the whispering goose, and that night, Zhenzhen had vanished for 3 hours and returned with a smile that made mirrors blush. Tonight, it blinked again. She lit it with a sigh, released it with a wink, and watched as it floated into the sky, slow, seductive, and slightly mischievous. The wind carried it toward the plum blossom pavilion, where a masked figure waited, cloaked in moonlight and mystery. The handmaidens whispered, the concubines speculated, the emperor sulked. But Zhenzhen simply smiled and descended the staircase, each step a promise, each breath a poem. She met the figure beneath the lantern's glow. No words were spoken, no names exchanged. Just a glance, a touch, and the kind of silence that makes history jealous. The lantern blinked once more, then flickered out. By morning, Zhenzhen was back in her chamber, sipping tea and humming a tune that no one recognized. Her robe was slightly askew, her comb was missing, and her smile was the kind that made scribes write poetry they didn't understand. To this day, the blinking lantern is forbidden at festivals, but sometimes one slips through, and when it does, the wind carries whispers through the city, soft, sultry, and shaped like a sigh. Every spring, the Forbidden City hosted the Royal Goose Parade, a majestic, mildly chaotic procession of the Emperor's prized geese, each trained to waddle in formation, honk in harmony, and occasionally wear tiny silk capes. It was a spectacle of feathers, flair, and foul diplomacy. The Emperor adored his geese. He claimed they were emotionally intelligent, excellent judges of character, and better conversationalists than half the ministers. His favorite, Bao Bao, had once interrupted a treaty signing by honking at a foreign ambassador's shoes. The ambassador left. The treaty was delayed. Bao Bao was promoted. This year's parade was especially important. The emperor had invited dignitaries from neighboring kingdoms, hoping to impress them with synchronized waddling and goose-themed snacks. Empress Zhenzhen, however, had other plans. She had grown tired of ceremonial honkings. She longed for moonlight, mischief, and dumplings that didn't taste like diplomacy. So, while the geese lined up in their embroidered vests, Zhenzhen slipped off her jeweled slippers and tiptoed toward the plum blossom gate. She wore her robe of barefoot rebellion, light, sheer, and scandalously short. Her hair was pinned with a comb shaped like a goose feather, and her fan read, "I'm not here." As the parade began, Bao Bao led the flock with imperial flair. The geese honked in perfect rhythm. Ministers clapped politely. The emperor wept with pride. Meanwhile, Genjen sprinted through Dumpling Alley, dodging vendors, giggling handmaidens, and one confused eunuch carrying a tray of ceremonial soy sauce. Her escape was graceful, daring, and slightly scented with plum wine. She reached the moonlight pavilion, where a masked figure waited, possibly a lover, possibly a poet, possibly just someone with excellent timing. They shared tea, laughter, and a moment so intimate that even the lanterns blushed. Back at the parade, the emperor noticed her absence. "Where is Jen?" he asked, mid-honk. Bao Bao honked twice, a signal that translated loosely to, "She's being fabulous." The emperor sighed. "Of course she is." By sunset, Jen returned, barefoot, glowing, and carrying a dumpling shaped like a goose. She bowed, winked, and rejoined the parade just in time for the final honk. To this day, the Royal Goose Parade includes a ceremonial barefoot lap in her honor. And if you listen closely, you might hear the soft patter of rebellious footsteps and the faint giggle of an empress who refused to be bored. Buried deep within the Forbidden City, past the Hall of Decorative Silence, and beneath the pavilion of passive-aggressive poetry, lay a room so boring it had its own echo of indifference, the Chamber of Eternal May. It was designed for serious reflection, quiet contemplation, and meetings that should have been naps. The walls were beige. The cushions were beige. Even the incense smelled like beige. Ministers feared it. Concubines avoided it. The emperor once spent 6 minutes inside and emerged asking existential questions about dumplings. But Empress Dowager Yuanxi loved it. She claimed it was the only place where she could truly relax, yawn without judgment, and plot minor mischief without interruption. She brought her handmaidens, her pillow, and a scroll titled, "How to Look Interested While Mentally Undressing Someone." One evening, she invited Empress Jen and Empress Mei Ling for what she called a strategic boredom session. They arrived in robes so sheer they violated 3 footnotes in the imperial dress code. Each carried a fan, a flask of plum wine, and a secret. They sat, they sighed, they stared at the beige walls. Then, mischief began. Jen pulled out a deck of forbidden cards, each one illustrated with scandalous scenes from past dynasties. Mei Ling produced a dice carved from jade and flirtation. Yan Shi unveiled a game board shaped like a sleeping phoenix. The game was called Whisper and Wink. Rules: roll the dice, draw a card, whisper a secret, wink at someone, pretend nothing happened. The first round revealed that Mei Ling once seduced a diplomat using only eyebrow movements. The second round uncovered Zhen's midnight rendezvous with a masked poet who spoke in dumpling metaphors. The third round, Yan Shi confessed she once fell asleep during a coronation and woke up married. The chamber, once duller than boiled lotus root, pulsed with laughter, sighs, and the occasional seductive gasp. Even the beige walls blushed. Outside, the guards heard giggles and assumed it was a ghost. Inside, the empresses toasted to boredom, mischief, and the art of turning beige into blush. By dawn, the game was sealed in a scroll, the cards hidden in a hollow pillow, and the chamber renamed the Room of Strategic May and Occasional Fabulousness. To this day, if you sneak past the plum blossom gate and press your ear to the chamber wall, you might hear a whisper, a wink, and the soft rustle of a robe that's up to no good.
Tucked behind the plum blossom pavilion, hidden beneath layers of ivy and imperial denial, stood a wall unlike any other in the Forbidden City. It wasn't tall. It wasn't grand. But it was legendary. They called it the Whispering Wall, built during the reign of Emperor Sleepy Shen. It was originally intended as a sound barrier to muffle the nightly giggles of concubines. Instead, it became a sanctuary of secrets, a place where whispers echoed, kisses lingered, and history blushed. The wall had a peculiar talent. It amplified whispers but swallowed shouts. A concubine could lean in, murmur a scandal, and the wall would carry it to the ears of another 3 chambers away, mid-bath, or hiding behind a silk screen. Empress Zhang discovered its power during a game of hide and flirt. She whispered, "I know what you did with the dumpling," and moments later, a eunuch dropped a tray in shock. The wall had spoken. Soon, the concubines turned it into a game. Whisper a secret, receive a kiss, trade a rumor for a sigh. They called it lip for lip. Empress Mei Ling once whispered the entire recipe for seduction into the wall. 3 days later, a visiting prince fainted during a toast. Empress Yanqi used it to yawn flirtatiously at the emperor without ever entering his chamber. One concubine confessed she had kissed a goose. The wall giggled, but the wall had rules, no lies. It refused to echo falsehoods. No shouting. It considered volume vulgar. And absolutely no gossip about dumpling stuffing. That was sacred. One night, during the festival of Moonlight Whispers, the empresses gathered at the wall wearing robes so sheer they were technically suggestions. They sipped plum wine, leaned in, and whispered their desires, not for power, not for gold, but for kisses that meant something. The wall pulsed with secrets. It hummed with longing. It glowed faintly as if blushing. The emperor, curious and slightly jealous, tried to whisper into it. The wall ignored him. He tried again. It whispered back, "Try softer." To this day, the whispering wall remains untouched by restoration. It's said that if you lean in at midnight and whisper your truest desire, it will carry it to someone who needs to hear it, and maybe, just maybe, send back a kiss.
Before the Whispering Dynasty embraced silk robes and seductive sighs, bedtime fashion was a battlefield. Empresses slept in ceremonial gowns, concubines napped in embroidered armor, and the emperor once wore a scroll as a blanket for symbolic warmth. But then came Empress Lin Lin, visionary, rebel, and inventor of the imperial pajama. She declared, "Why must sleep be stiff? Why must dreams be dressed in discomfort? I demand softness. I demand sass. I demand pockets." Her first creation was scandalous, a 2-piece silk ensemble in moonlight blue, embroidered with sleepy phoenixes and trimmed with flirtation. It was breathable, backless, and banned within hours. The ministers called it a threat to tradition. The emperor called it distracting. The handmaidens called it fabulous. Lin Lin wore it anyway. She strutted through the palace at midnight, sipping plum wine and humming lullabies. Her pajama pants swished like gossip. Her top fluttered like a fan in heat. One eunuch fainted. A goose honked in approval. Then came the incident. During the Festival of Whispered Wishes, Lin Lin hosted a sleep salon, a gathering of empresses, concubines, and one confused poet. The theme, dress for the dream you want. She arrived in her newest design, a sheer, feather-light pajama robe that looked like moonlight and felt like rebellion. But in her excitement, she forgot one crucial detail. She forgot to wear it. She had draped it over a chair. She had admired it. She had toasted to it. But she had not actually put it on. The room gasped. The emperor dropped his dumpling. A lantern flickered suggestively. Lin Lin, unfazed, raised her fan and declared, "Fashion is not worn. It is felt." The salon erupted in applause. Pajamas became the new imperial obsession. Scrolls were rewritten, dress codes were relaxed. One minister resigned to pursue a career in bedtime couture. To this day, the Empress's original pajama design is preserved in the Silk Museum of Sleepy Elegance, and every year, on the anniversary of her wardrobe oopsie, the palace hosts a pajama parade, where robes are optional and confidence is mandatory. And if you wander the Forbidden City at midnight, you might hear a whisper through the silk screens. She forgot it and changed everything. Once a year, beneath the blush of moonlight and the scent of plum blossoms, the Empresses of the Forbidden City gathered for a ritual so slow, so sensual, and so sleep-inducing that even the lanterns dimmed themselves in respect. It was called the Ceremony of the Sleepy Lotus. No one knew exactly how it began. Some said it was invented by Empress Dowager Yuan Shi after she fell asleep in a lotus pond and woke up with enlightenment. Others claimed it was a secret concubine tradition, passed down through sighs in the silk. Either way, it was sacred and scandalously soothing. The ceremony took place in the lotus courtyard, where petals floated in jade bowls, and the air was thick with incense and innuendo. Each empress arrived in her robe of floral intention, designed to match her chosen lotus. Zhenzhen wore crimson petals, symbolizing passion and plum wine. Mei Ling chose pale pink for mystery and mildly suggestive glances. Yuan Xi, naturally, wore faded ivory, representing naps, nostalgia, and the occasional snore. The ritual began with the petal offering. Each empress selected a lotus, whispered a secret into its bloom, and placed it in the ceremonial bowl. The petals absorbed the whispers, shimmered briefly, and floated away, carrying scandal across the courtyard. Then came the sighing circle. The empresses reclined on silk cushions, sipped sleepy tea, a blend of jasmine, honey, and flirtation, and took turns sighing. Not just any sighs, intentional sighs. Sighs that meant something. Sighs that could seduce a diplomat or end a treaty. Zhenzhen's sigh was long and low, like a robe slipping off a shoulder. Mei Ling's was sharp and playful, like a fan snapping shut after a wink. Yuan Shi's was so deep it caused a goose to fall asleep mid-honk. The emperor, forbidden from attending, watched from a tower with binoculars carved from jade and jealousy. He claimed it was for security reasons. Everyone knew it was for the sighs. The final act was the blooming silence. Each empress lay back, eyes closed, petals in hand, and let the silence bloom around them. No words, no movement, just breath, silk, and the occasional seductive snore. By dawn, the courtyard was littered with petals, secrets, and one scroll titled, "How to Sigh Like You Mean It." The ceremony of the Sleepy Lotus was complete. To this day, the ritual remains unrecorded, unregulated, and utterly irresistible. And if you wander the courtyard at midnight, you might find a single petal floating in a bowl, whispering a secret, sighing a name, and waiting to bloom again. It was the summer of 1292, and the Forbidden City was melting. Silk stuck to skin. Dumplings sweated. Even the emperor's scrolls curled at the edges from sheer humidity. The empresses, trapped in layers of ceremonial robes and expectations, were one sigh away from rebellion. Enter Empress Mei Ling, she of the sharp fan and sharper wit. She declared, "If the wind will not come to us, we shall summon it, with flair." And thus began the great fan flap of 1292. The empresses gathered in the moonlight chamber, each armed with a fan, Zhen wielded a crimson fan embroidered with scandal. Yuan Shi chose a pale ivory fan that doubled as a nap signal. Mei Ling, of course, carried the infamous fan of revealing intent, a masterpiece of silk and seduction designed to flutter just enough to suggest everything and confirm nothing. The goal? To create a breeze. The method? Synchronized flapping. The risk? Accidental exposure. They began slowly, graceful wrist flicks, elegant sighs, and the occasional giggle. The fans danced through the air like gossip at a banquet. The temperature dropped. The mood rose. Then it happened. Mei Ling, caught in a particularly passionate flap, flicked her fan with such force that her robe shifted and revealed a thigh. Not just any thigh. A thigh so sculpted, so shimmering with plum-scented lotion, that one eunuch dropped his tray and whispered, "I have seen the moon." The emperor, watching from his tower with his ceremonial binoculars, gasped. A minister fainted. A goose honked in awe. The thigh became legend. Poets wrote verses about it. A breeze, a glimpse, a dynasty undone. Artists painted it, always in soft pastels, always with a fan hovering nearby. One scroll depicted it as a phoenix rising from silk. Mei Ling, unfazed, simply smiled and said, "The wind reveals what it loves." The fan flap continued, now with added flair. Empresses began experimenting with angles, rhythms, and strategically timed sighs. The emperor issued a decree. All fans must be approved for public flapping. It was ignored. To this day, the great fan flap is commemorated with a ceremonial breeze dance, performed in sheer robes and scandalous silence. And if you stand in the moonlight chamber at dusk, you might feel a sudden gust, soft, sultry, and shaped like a sigh. And perhaps, just perhaps, catch a glimpse of a thigh that once changed everything. In the sultry heart of the Forbidden City, where treaties were whispered and seduction was a second language, there existed a pact so potent, so plum-scented, and so scandalously sealed that no scroll could contain it. They called it the Plum Wine Pact. It began, as all great diplomatic disasters do, with a toast. Empress Zhen had invited the emperor and his ministers to a midnight tasting, an event rumored to be about wine, but clearly about something else. She wore her robe of liquid intent, a sheer cascade of violet silk that shimmered like a sigh. Her lips were stained with plum, her fan read, "Sip carefully," and her eyes promised everything. The wine was brewed from forbidden plums, picked under moonlight, fermented with flirtation, and stirred with a jade spoon once used in a scandalous bath. Each sip tasted like memory, mystery, and mild regret. The emperor, already tipsy from her gaze, raised his cup. "To peace," he said. Zhen raised hers. "To pleasure." The ministers blinked. A goose honked. The pact began. Instead of scrolls, they used silk napkins. Instead of ink, they used plum wine. Instead of signatures, they kissed. Yes, they kissed the napkins. Each empress left a lip print, perfectly placed, slightly suggestive. Zhen's was angled like a promise. Mei Ling's was smudged like a secret. Yuan Shi's was faint, dreamy, and shaped like a sigh. The emperor, flustered and flushed, kissed his napkin twice. It was deemed excessive, but understandable. The pact included a ban on boring banquets, a weekly nap hour for all concubines, and a new law: no treaty shall be signed without wine, silk, and at least one meaningful glance. The ministers protested. The empresses giggled. The goose was promoted. By dawn, The napkins were sealed in a lacquered box, placed in the archives, and labeled, "Do not smell without permission." To this day, the Plum Wine Pact remains the only treaty in imperial history signed entirely with lips. And if you wander the moonlight chamber at midnight, you might catch the scent of plum, the rustle of silk, and the faint echo of a kiss that changed everything. In the hush of the Forbidden City, where silk rustled like secrets and moonlight tiptoed across lacquered floors, sleep was never just sleep. It was strategy. It was seduction. It was scandal. And no one understood this better than Empress Dowager Yuan-Si, inventor of the Imperial Snore Translator. It began as a joke. A eunuch claimed he could interpret her snores. That one meant dumplings, he said. That one meant regret. She giggled. Then she commissioned a scroll. The translator was a lacquered box carved with sleepy phoenixes and lined with velvet. Inside, a fan, a feather, and a scroll titled Snore Syntax, a guide to nocturnal nuance. Each snore had meaning. A short puff meant mild desire. A long rumble meant diplomatic boredom. A flutter snore meant she was dreaming of someone specific, usually shirtless. Empress Zhen tested it during a nap salon. She reclined in her robe of suggestive slumber, sighed once, snored twice, and the box translated, "I want tea, and maybe a kiss." The emperor, desperate to decode his own dreams, borrowed the box. It translated his snore as, "I miss her, also dumplings." He wept. Soon, the translator became a palace obsession. Concubines used it to decode pillow talk. Ministers used it to predict mood swings. One goose snored near it and was declared emotionally complex. But the box had limits. One night, Empress Mei Ling snored a pattern so intricate it broke the scroll. The box blinked, sighed, and whispered, "This is not desire. This is destiny." The emperor tried to confiscate it. The empresses hid it in a hollow pillow. To this day, the imperial snore translator remains sealed in the chamber of whispered sleep, guarded by silence and scented with plum wine. And if you nap near it very softly, it might whisper your dream back to you, decoded, desired, and slightly scandalous. In the final hour before dawn, when the stars begin to yawn and the moon prepares her exit, the Forbidden City holds its breath. It is the hour of silk, soft silence, of dreams not yet surrendered, of hearts still half asleep. It is the hour of the last nap before sunrise. Empress Zhen, wrapped in her robe of lingering longing, reclined on the moonlight chaise, eyes half closed, lips slightly parted, and thoughts tangled in plum-scented memory. She had not slept, not truly, but she had drifted, between sighs, between scrolls, between the echo of a touch that still shimmered on her skin. The chamber was quiet. Even the lanterns had dimmed, as if respecting her solitude. Then came the sound. Not footsteps, not whispers, just breath. A presence entered, soft, familiar, shaped like a promise. He did not speak. He did not bow. He simply sat beside her, close enough for warmth, far enough for longing. She did not open her eyes. She did not need to. Their fingers brushed, accidentally, intentionally, like a poem written in silence. The nap began. Not a sleep, but a surrender, a shared stillness, a mutual drift. Outside, the sky blushed. Inside, they lay side by side, wrapped in silk and sighs, the robe slipping slightly, the air thick with unsaid things. And then, just before the first light kissed the lacquered floor, he moved closer. An embrace, not dramatic, not possessive, just perfect. His arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, their breath in sync, their hearts unsure, their bodies remembering what their minds had tried to forget. The sun rose. They did not. To this day, the moonlight chaise remains untouched, preserved in velvet and reverence. And if you sit upon it at dawn, you might feel a warmth, a whisper, and the faint echo of an embrace that bloomed in the final nap before sunrise. In the quietest corner of the Forbidden City, where the bamboo swayed like sighs and the lanterns flickered with longing, lived an empress who never sent her letters by hand. She sent them by wind. Empress Jen, she of the plum-stained lips and scandalous sighs, had grown tired of scrolls, messengers, and the weight of ink. She wanted her words to float, to drift, to dance across rooftops and slip into hearts without knocking. So she began writing love letters to the wind. She used silk scraps, scented with jasmine and moonlight. Her ink was brewed from plum wine and whispered promises. Her handwriting curled like a lover's breath on bare skin. Each letter began the same. If you find this, it was meant for you. She wrote of dreams, half remembered, touches never forgotten, and glances that lingered longer than propriety allowed. She wrote to no one. She wrote to everyone. She wrote to the wind. At midnight, she'd climb to the highest balcony, wearing her robe of unsent desire, and release the letters one by one. They fluttered like butterflies, like secrets, like silk, refusing to stay folded. Some landed in gardens, some tangled in hair. One floated into the emperor's tea. He drank it. He dreamed of her. The wind always replied, not in words, but in gestures. A sudden breeze when she sighed, a swirl of petals when she wept, a soft gust that lifted her robe, just enough to remind her she was still desired. One night, she wrote a final letter. I loved you before I knew your name. I'll love you after I forget mine. She released it with a kiss. The wind caught it, cradled it, and carried it far, beyond the palace, beyond the mountains, into legend. To this day, if you stand in the bamboo courtyard at midnight and close your eyes, you might feel a breeze brush your cheek, soft, scented, and shaped like a sigh. And if you listen closely, you might hear a whisper, if you find this, it was meant for you. The empresses have sighed, the robes have rustled, the dumplings have cooled, and the wind, ever faithful, carries their whispers into the night. Sleep well, dear dreamer. The silk is folded, the scrolls are sealed, the moon is listening. Good night.